Hello guys and welcome to another video. In this video we are discussing should you buy rental property as an investment in London? The short answer is probably not. So hopefully you'll stick around for the rest of the video where I explain exactly why I think that London might not be the best place for your money, what I think are better alternatives on a global scale, as well as where in the UK I am investing and where I think not only the capital appreciation opportunities are greater, but also the yields and the rents are much stronger. So if you like this sort of video, please give this video a big like. It does help me out with the algorithm. And if you haven't already subscribed, consider subscribing. Until we get to 10,000 subscribers, feel free, look in the description, there'll be a link. You can book a free one-to-one call with me, 15 minutes. We can talk about whatever you want, but only until we get to 10,000 subscribers, and we are growing quickly. So let's get into the video. Let's talk about London as a whole, and then let's break it down further. So London as an area has a rental yield at the moment of around about 4%. If you take into consideration Greater London and zones sort of 4 and 5, that pushes it up to about 5%. Whereas if you narrow the search into Westminster and the sort of actual city centre, you're down to about 2% yield. So why is Central London not capable of achieving the same yields as Greater London? Well, it comes down to one thing. In my opinion, it's affordability. It's the fact that there are only so many people who can afford to pay that much rent. And if you look at the average salary in the UK, or the average salary in London, should we say, then there is only a limit to how far you can push people, regardless of the demand and supply dynamics for property in the city. So even if house prices grow, the renters that are coming up behind can't afford to pay any more, so the yields narrow. And a good example of this also is in Oxford, where it's a highly desirable city, people want to live there, and house price growth has reflected that. At the same time, there is only so much that the local average wage can actually support, and the local average wage in Oxford is only around about 30 grand. So the average salary is only 30,000. There's only a limit to how much rent you can pay. Even with two incomes, right? There's only a limit to how far those rental yields can be pushed. Even if the desirability is there, even if the house prices grow. Remember that rental yield and buy-to-let investors are not the majority of people buying properties in the UK. The majority are people who are going to own their property and live in it. So it's important to understand that affordability has come far more into it, especially as interest rates have started to push up and landlords have had to put up rents in order to cover their costs. So I do personally have a property over in London, over in Erith, and for me the capital appreciation on that property has been fantastic over the time we've owned it. But if I think back to when we bought it, and we bought it in 2010, I want to say, for 176,000. And since then, it's gone from 175 to 400,000. So just over doubled. Well, during that period of time, the rent when we bought it, I think it was on the, you could market it for about 1,200. Well, today you can only market for about 1,800, 1,900. Again, there's a limit to what people can afford for a 3-bedroom house, especially when you go into the suburbs. And that's one of the areas where property prices and rental yields are strong. They are much better in those locations than in central London. So affordability is a big factor when it comes to rental yield, and it's also a big factor when we're coming to house price growth and capital appreciation, especially or mainly when we're in a high interest environment. And the reason is that when we're in a high interest environment, let me give you an example. If you bought a house for £200,000 and you've got a £150,000 mortgage, now regardless of your capital repayment structure, your interest on that 150,000, if your mortgage was at 2%, would only be £3,000 a year. Well, currently we're looking around 6% in terms of the interest rate. So that's 200 has gone to 600, plus whatever capital repayment you have on top. So that's become significantly more expensive. Now the same property uplifted from Sheffield and taken down south might be £800,000 with a £600,000 mortgage on it. Well, you see where I'm going with this, right? Before you were paying £900 of interest, and now you're paying £3,000 of interest. A huge difference in nominal terms. And this is where the big price divide has actually taken place. And over the last 2 or 3 years, it's played out, right? Like the northern cities, the cheaper properties, they've accelerated in house price growth. You just have to look at any of the charts. London, the southeast, the southwest, they've all stagnated. They're not growing as fast. And I think that with the high interest environment we're currently in, and likely to be in for the longer term, I think now is probably a very good time to switch that capital to being in those cities where the properties are cheaper. Let me give you another reason to do it though, because if that wasn't a strong enough business case, I think I've got one more. The minimum wage is the same in Oxford as it is in Sheffield. A 3-bedroom house in Oxford will be £500,000. In Sheffield, we're picking them up for £150,000. A person earning minimum wage is going to have far more ability to be able to purchase a property up in Sheffield, without question. So demand will be higher. On top of that, the rents up in Sheffield are significantly cheaper than in Oxford, like half the price. Even though the property might be 3 times the value in Oxford, it's about half the rent up in Sheffield, thus the yield being so much stronger. So I think that those areas with the national minimum wage being boosted and this Labour government is intent on raising national minimum wage and looking after the people on the lowest salaries. Let's face it, the lowest salaries are quickly becoming the average salary, because the average salary in the UK is about 32,000, 40 hours on £12.50 an hour is 26,000. So minimum wage, 2 more pushes and we're at about the average. So let's face it, we're getting close to that sort of parity of an average job is now a minimum wage job. And I think really with this sort of socialist agenda, that is the aim, is to push some equality, and it kind of erodes that middle class. It just means that, you know, lots of people get paid about the same regardless of a job they do. So my consideration when I'm investing, and let's face it, I don't have any control over policy, is to listen to what the government are doing, listen to the moves they're making, and understand what the ramifications of that may be. And in my opinion, that means that jobs that are minimum wage, regardless of where they are in the country, are quickly becoming the average job. And that means that in those areas where property prices are cheap, we have a significant advantage for that capital appreciation as well as rental push, because the rents are so much lower than they are down south. Now let me give you some examples, let me give you some data. So in London and Oxford and Cambridge, we're looking at sub 5% yields, and that is Greater London. I can tell you right now in Westminster it's sub 2%, but Greater London, 5%. For example, I know that Bexley, where I am, about 6.5%. The areas that I like Sheffield, 6.5%, well 6.38. Someone's going to have a go at me on the keyboard because I didn't say it properly, but 6.38. But let me give you an example of a property that we've recently sourced, bought for 140, rented out for 1,100, and with like 35, 40 grand in the deal, you're looking at a return on investments 10 to 12%, something like that. Really strong. But when we go to the top of the yield table, this is no surprise for me, because all of these areas have significantly lower average property values. And I'm just looking through this, there is nothing in the top 20 that has a house price above 150,000 for an average property. So I can tell you right now, what I'm saying is backed up by the data. In my opinion, that's completely backed up. The cheaper properties have a greater yield. So when you look at the surveys, for example, the Halifax House Price Index, the Nationwide, the Rightmove, the Zoopla, the ONS, every single survey you can find over the last 12 months will tell you exactly the same story when it comes to property price growth. The cheaper areas are accelerating, the more expensive areas are being held back. And I don't see this changing in the foreseeable future. So I think if you're looking to invest in UK property, stay away from London, stay away from Oxford, stay away from the south, quite frankly. I'd be looking at those Midlands areas and above for better yields and better capital appreciation. But what's your opinion? Let me know down in the comments. I'm absolutely fascinated. I know London property is a divisive topic, so I would love to hear what you've got to say. I will reply to every single one of them, and I will see you on the next video. Cheers, guys.